You can now hear Movie Heaven, Movie Hell on Stitcher. Stitcher is radio on demand. Listen anytime, anywhere. Stitcher is an award-winning free app that lets you listen to all your favourite shows, plus discover from 20,000 news, entertainment and sports shows. You can also create your own custom playlists. Stitcher is available on iOS, Android, Nook, iPad, and in over 4 million car dashboards. It's on demand and it's on the go. No downloading, no syncing, no wasted memory. You can stream your favourite podcasts from Stitcher. Don't have Stitcher? Download it free today at Stitcher.com or in the App Store. And please leave us a review and rating on Stitcher. Thank you. Welcome to Movie Heaven, Movie Hell with me, Simon Aitken, and
I'm Keith Eyles, and we are both independent filmmakers that enjoy talking about other filmmakers' work and related topics. And today, for this special, we are joined by a returning guest of ours, Chris Rogers, who was our guest on the Miami Vice podcast, which to date, I believe, is the most listened to of all of our podcasts. So welcome back, Chris.
Hi, thank you very much for inviting me back. I'm sure my presence had nothing whatsoever to do with that excellent result, but in the vague hope that it has, hopefully I can add something to this as well. So thank you again for having me.
So tonight we're going to talk about Bond, James Bond, and we're going to talk about the Daniel Craig era. If you've probably seen in the newspapers that he says he's considering leaving the franchise and leaving it open to somebody else. And what with his 4 films, Casino Royale, Quantum of Solace, Skyfall and Spectre, it seems, a perfect place to leave it and move on, especially the end of Spectre. Now, just a warning for everybody, we're going to get into spoilers. So if you've not seen Spectre yet, I would suggest stopping the podcast and go and see it and then come back.
Yeah, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you if you've not seen it yet? Where have you been? Where have you been? So, no, absolutely. Bond is a huge topic. I often mention on these podcasts what a huge James Bond fan I am and have been ever since I was a kid. So, this is a big one, and I'm glad we've sort of condensed it down to just Daniel Craig for this particular podcast.
So, what was the first Daniel Craig film that you guys saw?
I saw Casino Royale because, as Keith said, I've always been a big Bond fan, as I guess quite a few people have been. I think I'm right in saying that I've seen every Bond film at the pictures when it came out from Spy Who Loved Me onwards. I may possibly have missed a couple of the Pierce Brosnan ones, but I can't actually remember. But that's quite a few. So that's got to be at least half of them, I think. So for me, it was a natural progression after the hiatus, after Pierce Brosnan left and the announcement of Craig. I was absolutely up for seeing the next one. So yeah, for me, it was Casino Royale. And so obviously, you might imagine, I saw all 4 or the 3 others after that. So I've seen it as it's unfolded, which has been nice.
Yeah, well, same here. I mean, I think the first Bond movie I actually saw on the big screen was probably The Living Daylights. I was a big fan of Timothy Dalton as Bond at the time. But yes, I've obviously had subsequently, of course, watched all of the other films, and I own them all. I used to own them on VHS, then on DVD, and now on Blu-ray. So absolutely, as soon as Casino Royale was coming around, I was very excited about the whole prospect of this Bond reboot, or soft reboot at least, I guess. I've enjoyed the Daniel Craig arc. Let's just put it that way. And I'm sure we'll drill into that more. But yes, it did start with Casino Royale and has gone, obviously right the way through. And I've seen these films multiple times each. So big fan.
Yes, I was a bit late to the game. The first film I saw at the cinema was GoldenEye.
Wow.
Yeah, but I mean, but I had seen Bond films up to that point, either on video or TV, so I didn't. I'd seen them all as well. As we're just sort of talking about the beginning, when Daniel Craig was announced to take over from Pierce Brosnan, what were your guys' opinion of that? Because it was quite controversial at the time. I mean, people were going on about the fact that it was going to be a blonde Bond.
Yeah,
James
that didn't
Blonde.
bother me at all, and I have to say that was one of those silly little media stories that gets around. I know it kind of escalated into a alleged fan campaign website and all the rest of it, but that never really bothered me. I think it's interesting because the last couple of changes of actor have been characterized with this hiatus situation. It happened with Timothy Dalton. It happened with Brosnan as well. We may or may not briefly allude to that as we go on in terms of some of the backroom controversy around some of the production of some of the films in terms of scripts and rights and all the rest of it. But there was a gap, and when it was announced, it'd be interesting to see your guys' take on it. I obviously knew him as an actor from the 2 or 3 things that he'd done before, mostly actually Our Friends in the North, which was the '95 BBC TV series, which was the first thing I saw sporting his Geordie accent, which in the same way a lot of these actors do when you first encounter them, you assume that is his accent. And I can't remember whether I'd actually seen, I have a sneaking suspicion I hadn't seen Layer Cake, which I think he made before the Bond films, didn't he?
That's correct,
which is which is really, really good. I certainly saw it subsequently. And I think had I seen it at the time, that would have just confirmed the fact that, and it may be the time for an initial controversial statement, I think even on the basis of Our Friends in the North, from my point of view, and it was something that was confirmed when I actually saw Casino Royale, he was the best actor to play Bond to date. So I was very, very keen, very interested to see what it would turn out like. And I didn't have any feelings of negativity at all.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I had no problem at all with this announcement because I thought Layer Cake, for example, was an absolutely fantastic film. And I did very briefly get to meet Daniel Craig at a BAFTA screening of Layer Cake. This was long before he was announced as Bond, and I had just seen Enduring Love, which is another film that he did, which I thought was quite interesting. And it was quite good because, you know, I got to sort of go up, shake his hand, and have a really brief chat with him. And he was quite pleased that I brought up Enduring Love because obviously he'd been talking about Layer Cake on stage there for 2 hours before coming out. And so, of course, when I heard that he was Bond, I met him and sort of stood face to face with him, and I'm about the same height as him, and I'm also blonde, and obviously.
Did you really think it could have been you, and it should have been you?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I just sort of thought to myself, this kind of opens it up, and it's something different. I mean, I actually, I have all of the Bonds for me. And all of the actors who have played Bond are important for different reasons, which we probably haven't got time in this podcast to go into all of that. But one of the things, first of all, is we mentioned a couple of podcasts ago the film The Jacket, which Daniel Craig was in which he actually did have dark hair. So I thought to myself, maybe he would for Bond, but I'm glad he kind of brought himself to it. The other thing about all this blondness that I think's a bit weird is, let's face it, Roger Moore is not exactly dark haired. You know what I mean? So I never really quite that whole thing about, oh, it's a blonde Bond. I kind of didn't really get why that was a problem. I have heard people say that he is perhaps not as good looking as some of the actors who have played Bond. Certainly, I guess, following someone like Pierce Brosnan, for example. But I just thought that this whole idea of taking the Bond series, which after Die Another Day, I did feel was becoming very tired, taking it and rebooting it in this way. And if you like, because they got the rights back to Casino Royale, going back to that and having an opening story, I was all for it. So I never really had any issues with the casting. I was quite happy with Daniel Craig as Bond. Sadly, he is probably the last actor that's going to be older than me playing Bond, which I find quite depressing. But other than that, no, I was actually very happy with the casting and didn't have any real issue with it. I thought, no, he's a good actor. Let him do his thing, let him bring himself to it, which is absolutely what he did.
Interestingly, Keith, I actually take comfort in the fact that he's the same age as me. His birthday's about 2 weeks before mine, I think. So I think that's quite good.
So before we get into it, really, where do you rank Daniel Craig amongst the other Bonds?
I think that's a difficult one because, as Keith was alluding to, I suspect this was the point Keith was thinking of. In the same way that I think, came to the chase, I think it's almost impossible to judge the Craig era Bonds in comparison to the others because it was such a radical shift, and we'll go on to talk about that very shortly, I'm sure. You couldn't get a more radical change between Bonds and between eras and between periods. Partly because of the reboot, partly simply because of the style in which it was done, and obviously because of Craig as well compared to the others. So I think it's probably easier to compare actors than films, but I'm not even sure about that. So I don't know. I think it's a difficult one because I first came to it fresh with Roger Moore, of course. Dalton, I was never entirely convinced by, but that may have been more to do with the films and the material than himself. And there's a whole sub-story there, which we definitely can't get into, I don't think. I was never hugely impressed with Brosnan. I quite enjoyed him, and certainly in the initial films, GoldenEye and so on. But I don't know. There were elements of Die Another Day that showed what his Bonds could have been like, and that they could have gone in a certain direction. But obviously, that tended to be overwhelmed by the whole entire crap fest that was Die Another Day. So I think I think the trouble is they were all very much of their time. I mean, don't forget, we're talking about a 50-year cycle now across half a dozen different actors. So I think they blended and changed so much over the years that even with that, you've still got fairly hard shift between them. So I am dodging the question, obviously, but I don't really think you can even make that comparison in my mind because I think they're just so radically different, and particularly that shift from Brosnan to Craig. So yeah, I'm usually in my case sitting on the fence.
Yeah, I would agree with your comments there. I feel very much the same way. I mean, very briefly, I will just add. Obviously, I could talk about this for hours, but for me, I kind of look at the Bonds this way. I mean, Sean was the original. He brought so much to the screen adaptation of that character, and he had some very strong films during his tenure. George Lazenby, which a lot of people have problems with, I kind of have a problem with him overall as Bond, but he was in one of the most important films in the series and certainly one of the strongest films in the series. So he has some merit based on that. Roger Moore was the longest serving Bond and did the most official Bond films out of all of them so far. So even though he was a bit long in the tooth towards the end, Roger Moore was already James Bond, when I was a kid and growing up. So he was kind of the Bond I knew at that time, although obviously a very different style that he brought to it. I mentioned already I was a big fan of Timothy Dalton. Timothy Dalton kind of played Fleming's Bond in many respects. He handled the character much closer to the Fleming novels, and description-wise, he sort of physically embodied what brief descriptions there were in Fleming's novel of Bond. So he had a lot of good things going on. I mean, I think in terms of characterization, there's nothing that Daniel Craig's really done with it that Timothy Dalton hadn't already done. It was 20 years earlier, and I don't think the world was ready for it. And also, he never had so much flexibility in the scripts as the arc that Daniel Craig has been fortunate to have. With regards to Pierce Brosnan,
No, I was just going to say, sorry to interrupt, but very, very briefly, I think, and then we can maybe touch on this when we talk about the films, that I think that issue of Craig's involvement, which wasn't clear to me until I think post Quantum of Solace, I think, there were a couple of retrospective articles in magazines some time after that that explained some of the issues around the shooting of that. Even before Craig, the films were not scripted in the sense that we understand that in terms of other films. They weren't linear scripts that started with a plot premise and ended with one. They were very much written around scenarios and individual scenes. Often they started with the stunt team as well. So it's worth bearing in mind when we get into discussions about how scripts originated. But yeah, sorry, carry on.
Yeah, no, I mean, Daniel Craig, he's the first of any of the actors to actually be a producer on the Bond films as well, and he's actually finally credited as that on Spectre. So he's had a lot more creative control since this reboot of Bond. But I just wanted to say just about Brosnan. I actually think Brosnan was an extremely good all-rounder as Bond. He could do the tough stuff. He could do the one-liners. He was a very handsome man. You know, he kind of looked your sort of stereotypical image of Bond. I think the problem with Pierce's ones is I think some of the scripts that he had weren't necessarily as strong as some of his predecessors. And you know, I think he got a bit of a, particularly with his last film, a bit of a unfair score with that, really. But I did like Pierce, and I was a big fan. You know, right from Goldeneye, which was great to see Bond back after a 6-year gap at that point. Again, due to various legal reasons and stuff, but it was really good to see him back. So for me, they all have merit, but I think that the actor that's got to see Bond in its best character arc has indeed been Daniel Craig over these 4 films.
Well, for me, it's always going to be Sean Connery.
Mm-hmm. But of course.
But then closely followed by Daniel Craig.
Yeah.
The thing about the Daniel Craig Bond films is that they came out after a sort of change in sort of filmmaking, and that change was a film franchise called Bourne, Jason Bourne films, and very much it was a very gritty, realistic look at that kind of world. And so the idea of having invisible cars and jet skiing on tidal waves, and having the laser up in space destroying stuff. Sorry to pick on Die Another Day, but
pick away.
It is one of those films where it starts off really strong. I mean, it works really well when Bond is sort of outside the system and they can't trust him. But when he comes back into the fold and it's all about the gadgets and stuff again, that's where it sort of really loses the plot. You know, when they came to do Casino Royale, the game plan had changed. They couldn't do another Pierce Brosnan type film because you had Bourne out there, and Bourne had changed the film, filmscape. So I think that's one of the reasons why his films work kind of better, because there is a more realistic slant to them. It also kind of works because he actually looks like somebody who could handle himself in a fight and has been in many fights, because that was the only thing about all the other Bonds, was the fact that they got into fights, they shootouts, all this kind of stuff, and yet they were perfectly handsome and didn't look like they'd been punched once, really.
Yeah, I mean, Sean could pull it off. I think. I think Sean Connery really pulled off the sort of tough guy thing, and Timothy Dalton as well to an extent. But I know what you mean. Certainly Roger and Pierce to an extent. I agree with that point. And Daniel, when he did Casino Royale, definitely got himself into shape that he looked like a guy that could handle himself. That's for sure.
Well, let's get into the films. Let's get into Casino Royale. And I mean, I know you guys are going to get into it massively, so I'll just say my bit and then I'll let you guys go. But I would say that the thing I really enjoyed about Casino Royale is how you kind of see the character of James Bond being built up. And I remember the first time I watched it, I actually thought that maybe James Bond was a code name, that anybody could have been James Bond, that it was, 007, James Bond was a code name that they would give to, so that way it would explain why, you know, here we are. You got M, played by Judy Dench, who's just been dealing with Pierce Brosnan, and now she's got a younger Bond, and she's having to sort of, it felt like it was, a code name that was passed from spy to spy. But of course, as we find out through the other films, it's not the case that he is James Bond. But what do you guys think of Casino Royale?
Well, I saw it and was completely blown away by it, no pun intended. I think it's difficult to actually sum it up because it is my favourite of all the films. I mean, without jumping ahead too much, I think Skyfall could potentially shade it in some respects, but I don't think any of them are as complete and as coherent and as powerful as Casino Royale.
Same here, and I think personally the film that comes next for me is Spectre. I like Casino Royale and Spectre, and then Skyfall, and then Quantum of Solace. I think we can all agree that Quantum of Solace is the worst one.
Oh, let's not prejudge it.
Okay.
But I think with Casino Royale, I think, I'll try and, conscious of time, I'll try and summarize it. But I think stylistically, in terms of it as a film, leaving aside for a minute the fact that it was a Bond film, it was exceptional. I think, very interestingly, Martin Campbell directed it, and he directed Brosnan in his first film, Goldeneye. And I remember very clearly watching Goldeneye, and whilst I liked bits of it, I was really unimpressed by the direction, which is really quite interesting. And funnily enough, I subsequently saw a pilot, I think it was The Last Resort, American TV series a couple of years ago, and Campbell directed the pilot for that as well. And that also, I felt, completely flawed. I mention that only because I think his work in Casino Royale is superb. You have that brilliant pre-credit sequence in monochrome. You have that amazing kind of what would have been a pre-credit sequence in the old days, the free-running chase, which is absolutely phenomenal. And particularly when you find out that actually 99.9% of that was done for real, including the jumps on the cranes. It's just that they were wired up at the time, and some of them were done lower to the ground than actually it looks like. But that's a fantastic sequence. So directorially and stylistically, I thought it was terrific. In terms of the script, not having been familiar with the book, I understand that it's broadly similar, but not exactly the same. But in terms of the film script, it worked fantastically. And I remember thinking at the time, it's not a thriller, it's a love story. I think that's pretty clear. It obviously has thriller elements in it, but primarily it's a love story. And I think, suitably warned with everyone about the spoilers, I think that awful twist, whatever it is, 2/3 of the way through, where his love actually kills herself rather than go through with what she has to go through with, was incredibly shocking. I remember watching that. Again, brilliantly shot technically with the collapsing palazzo in Venice. But when she actually takes that key out of the lock and keeps it, I thought that was appalling. I thought it was really unbelievable. And then I think finally, what really sold it was such an impossibly radical reworking of the Bond film idea that I still, to this day, 10 years on, find it amazing that they actually did it, A, conceived it, and B, got away with it. And I mean that in the best possible sense, because as we all know, it takes every element of a Bond film, takes them all apart, reassembles them quite literally in a completely different order. So you don't get the Monty Norman theme until the very end. He doesn't even say Bond, James Bond until the very end. Every element of the Bond movies are there. They're just twisted around in a completely different way. And I still think that transition between the end of the pre-credit sequence, where he makes his second kill, the cut through to the Chris Cornell theme tune, which is still one of the best Bond film themes ever, and then how it segues into the film proper, I just think is genius. So if you add in also Ava Green's performance, which is absolutely fantastic. That first meeting they have on the train is exquisite. It's an outstanding bit of scripting, and it's a brilliant bit of acting.
Apart from the product placement, that the first time I saw that knocked me out at the film a bit.
Yeah, and I would not disagree there at all.
The one thing that slightly annoyed me was the blatant product placement and sort of cameos by sort of celebrities, because there's the whole bit with
the bloke that runs Virgin Airlines, yeah,
Richard Branson, yeah,
Richard Branson being patted down at the airport, and it's like a couple of models when he was checking into the hotel.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, but I think they're eminently forgivable when you look at the film as a whole.
Yeah.
So, as I say, that would easily be my favourite. But even sticking to it as talking about the first film out of 4, yeah, I think it's absolutely outstanding. Loved it. I've always loved it. It's actually one of those films where I'd only rewatch it if I'm in the right mood, because unlike all the other films, which are broadly more or less, i.e. pre-Craig films, broadly more or less candy floss films, you can enjoy them, but that's it. You kind of forget them when you take them out of the machine. Without wishing to sound too pretentious, there is a real emotional journey in Casino Royale, and I don't really want to go through that unless I'm really in the mood for it. And I still think it works really well on that basis. So that's me.
Yeah, well, I have to say, I mean, for me, this is one of the best films of the entire series, and certainly Daniel Craig's best one. I absolutely loved it when I went to see it. I find much like you, Simon, with the whole fan theories thing about James Bond being the sort of code name that goes with 007. That fan theory's been out there with a couple of others for some time. Sadly, because of all the supporting characters and because of the continuity in some of the earlier films and the references throughout, that theory sadly doesn't really work. When I went into this one, obviously we'd had a reboot the year previous with Batman, Batman Begins, and this was obviously going to be kind of Bond Begins. And I did sort of think, well, it's kind of a soft reboot in so much as you've still got Judi Dench playing M. She's wonderful as M, but obviously she had been Pierce Brosnan's M also. So I thought maybe that theory will work. Obviously it didn't when we sort of meet Felix Leiter. The many faces of Felix Leiter. He's kind of like John Connor in the Terminator series. It's never the same actor twice, or it wasn't up to that point anyway. I just think that it was sort of a soft reboot in the fact that they didn't go majorly much younger with Bond as they were going to in development. I mean, there was talk very early on about putting someone in their mid-20s to be Bond, but they actually went. Daniel Craig was 38 when he filmed this, and that kind of was in line with the book and worked really well. I think definitely I really like the move towards a more serious and more realistic story and Bond film. I agree entirely with what Chris has said about the fact that this one, whereas most of the Bond films, let's be honest, somewhat formulaic and work very much on spectacle, this one has those elements, but at the same time is a very, very good story. And what they've kind of done is they have taken the story from the novel, but of course they've expanded it out with these wonderful action sequences like the aforementioned free running sequence and things like that, which were done amazingly in this film. I think Martin Campbell is one of the strengths for this as well. I think they chose the right director. GoldenEye had its production problems with some of the deals being done very last minute, like with BMW and them trying to sort of shoehorn that in at the last second. So whereas I agree that the direction of GoldenEye probably wasn't quite as good. I think Martin Campbell did do an absolutely fabulous job with this, but he had obviously a good team around him, a good actor, and some good material to work with. And we have to remember that the Bond films, very much like the television world almost, are very much a producer-led series of films. Obviously the Broccolis, succeeded by Barbara and Michael G. Wilson, have a lot of control over the direction of this and where it goes. But yeah, for me, I think it was fantastic. The storyline works. Everything's in its place. I take your point about the blatant product placement. I mean, I have to say, since '95, since Pierce Brosnan took over the role, I have been a proud owner of Omega Seamaster myself. Not partly because it's James Bond's watch, but partly because I also think that they manufacture absolutely beautiful, designed, quality timepieces. But that's a whole nother story.
That's a product placement. Come on.
There we go. Hold up. Is that a Rolex?
Yeah. Exactly, but it's Omega.
Nice.
But yeah, that was a bit. I must admit that was a bit heavy-handed. But it's really hard for me to pick any holes in it. That the whole point Chris made about David Arnold's wonderful score that doesn't kick into the full Bond theme right until the end, along with his James Bond line. That all works beautifully because he's earned it by that point. You've been with the character, you've seen him evolve, you've seen him do things that you're not used to seeing him do, and you've seen him make mistakes. And I just thought that whole thing worked fabulously, and the score throughout this entire film is great because it hints towards the Bond theme without actually blatantly going there until the end. So I really could talk about this more and more, but I think it's an absolutely fantastic film and definitely one of the strongest in the entire series.
I mean, a couple of other points to mention, if I may, that we've all talked about this shift. I'm not going to say paradigm shift, but it is. Between the Brosnan era and between Craig, as seen through Casino Royale. I think Simon quite rightly mentioned about the Bourne films and the change to the filmmaking landscape that happened. But there was also the post 9/11 change, which was hinted at strangely in one of the few subtle moments of Die Another Day. If you watch the first half hour or so of Die Another Day, there are some very specific, albeit implicit, if that's not a contradiction in terms, changes to the fact that, and if you look at the time it was released, it's built into the story that his period of imprisonment in North Korea happens through 9/11. So, we're still living with that now 15 years on in terms of fictional filmmaking, all those things that came out of the TV coverage of 9/11, and also things like Iraq and Afghanistan. You have to accept that as well. That drove filmmaking as well. So it wasn't just, independent artistic decisions. And I think also what's clever is the fact that Casino Royale and the producers, they achieved all of that, again, as you were saying, Keith, whilst maintaining the continuity, part of the continuity set with the previous Bond films. So as you say, we'd already had the shift to Judi Dench, and yet they maintained that. And that, again, when you step back and think about it, that is actually really, really clever to do that. And like I say, to get away with it, because, they've scrapped Lois Maxwell, they've scrapped Robert Brown, and they scrapped Desmond Llewellyn before. But this time you've scrapped Samantha Bond and Colin Salmon and John Cleese and all the rest of it. And yet you've kept Judi Dench, and yet it works. So, it's just another good thing to mention. And I think just finally, a couple of points on the direction and the scripting and the acting. We should mention Mads Mikkelsen, I think, as the villain of the piece. Yes, you've got his little derangement of the tear duct, but that's all there is in terms of a nod to the Bond villains of old, the scarred Bond villains of old. The card game that it all works around, even if you don't understand the game, and it's not the same game that was in the book, but it's a game nevertheless, works incredibly well. It's very tense. It works well within the context of the story. Interrupted, of course, by a couple of action scenes, including that awfully brutal knife fight on the stairs, followed by Eva Green's best scene in the shower, which is absolutely great. And even things like the car chase with the roll, which got in the Guinness Book of Records, was the most times a car had ever been rolled. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't quite go so far. I don't think any film could be described as flawless, but it comes pretty close.
Just picking up on what you said about 9/11, I mean, the thing about all four films is they deal with instead of there being like a main villain, they're dealing with shadowy conspiracies. So it's the idea is there isn't like a main bad guy. There's somebody behind the main bad guy who's out there sort of being like sort of making things happen, making events happen. And as it goes along, especially culminating with Spectre, we learned that Blofeld has been behind a lot of these schemes that have been going on. He's been behind Le Chiffre, he's been behind Quantum, he was behind who was the guy in Skyfall? Who was the villain in Skyfall?
Oh, what, the Javier Bardem character? Yeah.
Yeah. What was his name?
Can't remember his name. Carry on, though.
I should know this, but carry on.
I'll let you know.
Okay. Well, anyway, there's always been somebody behind the main villain. There's been somebody behind the throne.
Silver.
Yeah, Raul Silver. Yes.
Okay. IMDb to the rescue.
Possibly.
So it ties into that post 9/11 world where this event happened and these people did this horrible event, but yet there was this terrorist organization behind it, but we didn't know who they were at the time. We have like a name like Bin Laden, but at the end of the day, when Bin Laden was taken out, the terrorist organization still went on.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I would query slightly in the sense that, yes, you're right. Spectre attempted, I use the word very, very deliberately, attempted to tie up the three previous ones and justify, and again, I use the word deliberately, that kind of, retro continuity, if you like. I don't think it worked, but we can come on to that in about an hour's time, no doubt. But I think you're right, Simon, in as much as, and I hadn't really thought about it before, but now you say it, yes, there are kind of villain front men in it. Interesting, they're all front men, though. I can't think of that many Bond films that have had a villain, a female villain. But anyway, maybe that's one for Gillian Anderson to pick up.
Well, I mean, the world was not enough.
Yeah, but yeah, fair point.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think it's a fair point because, you're right. Each of those films has an element of that in it. I think this is where there is a flaw with the whole concept, which is that, the original, well, Mendes did in the end direct two contiguous ones. But because the films are not planned in that sense, you always have a risk there. And that's one of the reasons why the continuity beyond, the overall framework, the continuity just isn't there, and why there are only, out of 20 or 30 films, there are only 2 or 3 that actually follow on continuously, because they're just not made like that. They're not made with a franchise in the same way that the MCU stuff is done. And that may be a good thing, maybe a bad thing, but I think that's perhaps one of the reasons why, for me, that attempt to tie things up in Spectre didn't really work at all.
Yeah, I mean, they tried, back in Connery's era, there was a certain level of continuity, and of course, back then, you had Spectre being this organization behind all of these massive, world domineering events, but obviously there was no continuity in the fact that actors changed all of the time. Even the actor playing Bond, throughout that period, as well as all the Blofelds that they had back then. So it never had the same sort of cohesiveness that these films have got. I think with back to the whole Judi Dench thing, I think, on one hand it was smart thinking, but on the other hand, I do feel that Eon were kind of playing it slightly safe as well at that point, because they knew that she was a hit with the audience and everybody sort of loved her, so she was the one that sort of kept it somewhat grounded where it had been whilst trying to do this reboot. And I know there were all sorts of things. I mean, not just about a much younger Bond, but there's always that thing, about Tarantino's take on it, about how he wanted to go right back and set it in the 50s and really, really mess with it. But as you've rightly pointed out, these guys decided to kind of go with the Jason Bourne model and move it this way. And a good move, I think it was. But of course, we will sort of delve more into that as we move through the films.
Well, yeah, but I mean, the thing that I've really liked about Daniel Craig's Bond and his journey through these films is that he's gone from somebody who, kills quite, aggressively to somebody who then thinks about if it's worth killing or not. I mean, especially through Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace, Judi Dench will go, "Oh, you killed him. We could have used him. We could have found out more." And it's like, well, he didn't give me a choice. Mm-hmm. And yet by the time we reach the end of Spectre, where he's got a chance to, kill Blofeld, he decides to take his finger off the trigger. So I think that is one of the things, the through threads that I've quite liked through these 4 films, because at the end of the chase sequence at the beginning of Casino Royale, where he is chasing after the bomber, and he just he blatantly just shoots him and blows up those gas canisters so he can make an escape. I mean, he just killed the guy when really they could have interrogated him and found out a lot more about what was going on.
Yeah, no, I agree.
The one last thing I want to say about Casino Royale before we move on to the next one, onto Quantum of Solace, was that when I saw it at the cinema, I was quite enjoying it up to the point where we get the torture sequence. And the reason why I felt a bit uneasy while watching it was because in the cinema screen I was in, it was full of kids.
Right.
And I was like, whoa, this is really inappropriate for these kids. I mean, it's one of the most painful tortures I've seen on screen, where, he's whipping him with the rope. And I thought, wow, how could they get away with this being a 12A?
Yeah, I know. It's certainly not a kid's film, that's for sure. And I can see how that would be sort of inappropriate for people that or kids that don't have proper parental guidance and whatever. But yes, I mean, I think every man in the audience's eyes watered during that scene, which of course is taken straight from the book, and and very well performed, I thought, by both actors.
The scene is from the book. I think the implement is different, but yes, the concept is certainly there.
Yeah, but no, I mean, I would say the Bond film, the Craig era has also been a much more adult type of Bond. In fact, I actually feel quite blessed, because I almost feel like the Bond movies have kind of grown up with me in some respects, meaning, I grew up with Roger Moore films, which, let's be honest, they're quite laughable by today's standards and incredibly tongue-in-cheek and, far-fetched and whatever. Whereas this with Daniel Craig is, it has changed things quite a bit, and because Casino Royale being the biggest change of the whole series, taking it into a sort of more adult themed and serious and violent type of movie.
No, I'd agree with that entirely. I think your point about the torture scene and the certification is an interesting one, and if we had to get into that whole story about why that was allowed, that'll keep us another couple of hours. But I think it's part of the whole conceptual shift and the way that the artistic and aesthetic shift that we talked about from the beginning. And it's right, I think. And I think, as we've all alluded to, the books were tougher, certainly tougher. I mean, I've read a couple of the early ones since. They were far tougher, and they were hinted at with the early Connery films. But even they pulled their punches really, because very quickly, because of the period in which they were made. I think, interestingly, well, if they'd have been made, maybe if they'd been unsuccessful and kind of continued on in a sort of low budget way, and maybe had been started in the 70s, it might have looked a bit different. But I think because they were started in the 60s and were very successful, which means populist, which means mainstream, that kind of ruled out any kind of closeness to the original books eventually. And of course, as we know, in terms of storyline, they diverged more and more as they went on. But yeah, it was inevitable that it would change. I think the whole certification thing is a perfectly valid argument, and I've never agreed with the 12 certificate or the 12A either, for that matter. I think we all know why, and our audience will know why it happens.
Ka-ching.
I was just about to say the same thing. But I think that's a shame, because it undermines the whole purpose of classification. And I think, life is like that now, and that's just the way things are in terms of what is being depicted. But I think it's a real conversation around whether that sort of stuff should trickle down through the categories, as it inevitably does. And it's definitely not too OTT to say that if you take most of the films that we would probably have liked or did like 20 years ago and resubmitted them for classification, they would all probably come out as 12s now. Even Terminator would, which really isn't that violent when you look at it, and it's kind of sad in a way for me to say that, but it just isn't.
Well, I know. I think Terminator did get it's got a certificate of 15 now. Because in the first scene, he does rip a guy's heart out of his chest.
He does.
That would definitely. If that was in the 12, I was like, blimey, things have gone for the worse.
Yeah, it has all changed, with the violence and everything. Even profanity now. I always say that, saying the F word is like saying shit nowadays, and the C word has become the new F word. In movies, it's kind of all shifted, and that says something about society, I guess. But that is a whole nother podcast, so I'll get off of that and back to Bond.
Let's move on to Quantum of Solace, and let's hopefully give it about the time that the word quantum implies.
Oh, okay.
Well, from my understanding, that Quantum of Solace is the first film that is not based on an Ian Fleming novel, but is it based off a line of? What is it based off?
There's a title. Okay. I think it's the title only, which is what happened to a lot of the latter era Roger Moore films.
Yeah, it was basically, there was some short stories within For Your Eyes Only, and it was one of the few titles that hadn't been used. Obviously they'd kind of used most of them up by the time they got to The Living Daylights, and as Chris has rightly said, for most of the from the Roger Moore era, basically all they'd really done is taken the title, a very loose premise, and in some cases the odd character name here and there, and that's been the only resemblance. So they had actually been sort of moved away from Bond novels and Bond titles since License to Kill, so for some time. But this, indeed, there were some short stories which Octopussy and For Your Eyes Only and The Living Daylights were part of, and I believe Quantum of Solace was there, but they took no plot points whatsoever. It's just purely the title, which obviously a lot of people had problems with.
Well, this is the first Bond film to continue immediately from the end of the last one.
To an extent, yeah.
And it does so very cleverly. Actually, I'm almost annoyed to have to give it anything, but yeah, you're right. Well, I think what's great. No, well, be honest.
I'll tell you what. If we're going to go there, I have to get my rant out the way, if you don't mind. Yeah. I am a mad stickler for continuity. Okay. And basically what happened here, and it really bugged me and it pulled me right out of the movie, is yes, we get that wonderful end sequence with Mr. White, at the end of Casino Royale, where, he comes up and he says the famous line about being Bond, James Bond, and all of this sort of thing. At the time, they were still using Baroni as the tailor for Bond in Casino Royale, which they'd used through the whole of the Pierce Brosnan era. So when Bond walks up, he is actually wearing like a three-piece navy blue suit with a light blue shirt and tie. Okay. In between the films, they changed costume designers, and because Daniel Craig got some power at this point, he wanted to go with Tom Ford, who was his favorite suit designer and tailor. So they went with Tom Ford suits. But what really wound me up is this is supposed to take place like half an hour, 45 minutes or whatever after that end sequence. And suddenly he has gone from a navy blue three-piece suit to a charcoal grey two-piece suit, and from a light blue shirt to a white shirt. So he's wearing a completely different suit. And I'm like, that's terrible continuity if you watch it back to back. And that always bothered me. And I understand why it happened, but I just thought, obviously a lot of people don't notice this, but it annoyed me. And I thought, why didn't they go with something closer?
And after that, Keith couldn't get into the rest of the film.
He's now spoiled the only good bit of the film for me. All I was going to say was that that it is quite clever that it does follow on from the last film exactly, as you were saying. But the clever bit is that in the script for Casino Royale, most people tend to forget that there was a gap of several weeks, if not months, between the end of the main action and those last bits on the island of Mr. White. And that was quite clever. So the time shift was taken care of in the first film, allowing them to go straight on from the capture of Mr. White into this film. And I am slightly conflicted, although only slightly, by that pre-credit sequence in Quantum, because in some respects it is a good sequence. It's very strange. Although much as I detest the film, I've watched that sequence quite often, mainly because it is the best bit in the film, and also because I like the opening credit titles as well. So I tend to watch that, when it cycles round on TV. But at the same time, and this is the important bit, I think, I remember watching it very clearly, in the pictures when it came out, and a lot of elements of that car chase, when you see it for the first time, particularly on a big screen, you are very much into what the hell was that? What happened there? Sorry, where's that car going? Which car indeed is that? And all of that. And that was very notable because most of the flaws are there are two big things wrong with Quantum of Solace, which is the entire script and the entire direction. So whilst a lot of that is down to the script, an awful lot of it is down to the direct sequence. And of course, there was a lot of criticism at the time around Mark Forster, who had never directed an action film before. That in and of itself shouldn't necessarily be a problem. It's just that in this instance, it really, really was. When you decide that in your first very, very tightly edited, very tightly framed car chase, you are going to have both of the cars chase. I think it's two. In fact, I'm still not entirely sure how many cars were chasing him right at the beginning. It might have been three. But when the pursuit cars are virtually the same car as your hero's car, that's a bad thing to do to start with, because you're already on a bit of a loser. That whole sequence that follows then in Siena, that was mind-numbingly hard to follow. Even now, when you watch it again in slow motion, the shootout in the MI6 interrogation room, it's actually impossible to work out who killed who and why. It really is a real mess of a film in terms of direction. And I think the script as well, it's just a mess. It's like the old days, because it's just it comes over as a random collection of scenes, none of which make a lot of sense. Yes, we've gone back to the old kind of villain dominating the world. Yes, you're right, as Simon said, there's a bit of a background conspiracy theory, but by the time you've added up all the different people that are after oil or water or gold or power or all four, you don't really care in the end. And I remember when I saw it, I turned to the person I was watching it with, and we both looked at each other as if we didn't even say anything. We just sort of thought, what was that all about? And finally, and I will shut up because I've got literally nothing to add, it's a very little known fact fans, that Quantum of Solace is by a long way the shortest of all the Bond films. It's about 90 minutes, and yet it feels like the longest. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, I want to just say that the going from Casino Royale, where the action was so nicely framed and it was so steady, you could see what was happening and where, and then to go into these really shaky cam close-ups, things coming from all different directions. It was really hard to follow what was going on, and I'm glad that when they went to do Skyfall, that they went back to the Casino Royale way of shooting action, because then you could actually see what was going on. um I think the problem with Quantum of Solace is that they're trying to sort of deal with his psychological state to some extent. The whole idea that he's still grieving for Vesper and he's out for some kind of revenge. I mean, I do kind of like the scene at the end where he confronts the boyfriend of Vesper. I thought that kind of worked, and its sort of snowy location was reminiscent of the beginning of Casino Royale, even though it wasn't in black and white.
That's a good point.
But it was, yeah, it was. The story just wasn't strong enough, and that was partly due to the fact that there was the writers' strike, so they literally had to write something very quickly and put it into production before the writers' strike started. So they didn't have the amount of prep work and amount of script time as they did on Casino Royale or the other films. So that was one of the things that was, affected this film. I think if they had been given a bit more time with the script, it could have worked quite nicely. It would have been quite interesting to see Bond go from one film into the other and dealing with the events from that last film.
Yeah, I mean, no surprise. I've got quite a few things to say about Quantum of Solace. Not all of it bad. I mean, sort of good and bad. First of all, just to pick up on, you're absolutely right, Simon. It was indeed. They'd started writing Quantum of Solace whilst they were still making Casino Royale to be this sort of seamless continuation and follow with the Bond's psychological state, etc., following the events that happen in Casino Royale. But yes, it was this came out only 2 years later, so it was kind of rushed into production. It did absolutely clash with the writers' strike, to the point that the script was still being written or finished when they went into production, which is never a good thing to do. And this is where Daniel Craig and Mark Foster, even though they're not credited, actually ended up finishing the script for this. They'd already had an outline from Haggis and Neil Purvis and Robert Wade, and obviously Paul Haggis had contributed big time to Casino Royale and expanding out Fleming's novel there. Yeah, I think it absolutely suffers from the script not being as strong, even though it's nice that they were trying to pick up threads, and this was very much an add-on. It was almost like a sort of the next act, literally, to the Casino Royale story, which was, of course, a long film in itself. I also agree entirely that Mark Foster's direction of this, sadly, even though he'd had some hits and done some interesting films previous, his direction of this, that the big problem I've always seen with this, and I've always said to everyone, is what they've tried to do is, with this style of action and photography, they were trying to sort of copy what Greengrass had done with the second two Bourne films. But they made one big mistake with it, in my opinion, is that whereas Greengrass was all about the camera constantly moving, very sort of shaky cam and erratic with the action, Greengrass doesn't cut much. Basically, those action sequences are quite long, and you end up following Jason Bourne in that action, and the scenes tend to go on for quite a time. What's the problem with Quantum of Solace's look and direction was, you also mixed kind of MTV style editing with this erratic, shaky cam, and what you do end up with are action sequences where the stunt guys, bless them, have done an absolutely fantastic job, and the second unit directors, etc., absolutely wonderful stuff. But when it's actually edited and put together, you don't see a lot of that great stuff because it is so difficult to follow. And that was that along with the continuity thing was one of my big problems with Quantum of Solace in terms of how it looked there. Having said that, I agree with Simon. I do kind of like the way they wrap some of Bond's arc and some of his journey with regards to the Vesper storyline up towards the end of the film. I will also say that, in my opinion, Daniel Craig looks best in this film of the entire series as Bond. He really seems to have fitted and got comfortable in the role. In Casino Royale, though he was in very good shape, he was quite bulky. On this film, he'd actually sort of leaned down somewhat. And at this point, the Tom Ford suits that he was wearing were nicely fitted, but hadn't yet gone to the ridiculous skinny type short suits that he was wearing in Skyfall and Spectre, which I really didn't like. And he hadn't gone for this ridiculous buzz cut hairstyle. So I actually think, in terms of how Bond looks, or how Daniel Craig's Bond looks, he is in the best shape and looks the smoothest in this one, in my opinion. And there are some really good, action sequences in this. Sadly, you can't see them very well, and I do totally take that point. And the other thing we'll probably come on to when we talk about Skyfall, I will sort of harken back to some points about this, but the other thing I do quite like is, even though he has his fling with Strawberry Fields, played by the lovely Gemma Arterton.
Jesus, don't even get me started on that.
Well, yeah, we can get into that. But with the whole Bond getting the girl, I kind of like the fact that he doesn't get the main actress, Camille, played by Olga, in this film. I kind of like the fact that she jumps out of the car at the end, and there wasn't anything between them. I thought was kind of a refreshing change. So I think it's not completely without its merits, but it is certainly the weakest entry in the Daniel Craig Bond canon.
Well, I mean, the Olga Kurylenko character, she was his equal. She was somebody who was equally as damaged, and so I think the idea of the two of them jumping into bed, wouldn't have worked.
It's interesting because I never picked up. It is interesting because I never picked up on that element, or indeed the fact that Bond, who clearly was damaged at the end of the casino, and I don't know if this was, and again, one of those kind of retrospective justifications that I was reading when Quantum came out, but I never really picked up on any of that, because in the same way that continuity of suits was a problem for Keith, for me, the lack of continuity and coherence in the whole damn thing was such a barrier to entry that I couldn't actually give a damn about the whole thing. It's funny, it's a rare thing nowadays. I don't tend to write about things on my website that I don't like, and I know that's a bit self-limiting, and one should, of course, but I just don't. And hey, it's my website, so it doesn't matter. But I was so incensed by Quantum of Solace that, although I gave it a couple of weeks, I think, for it to settle in, I actually bashed out a huge long piece, not for my website, but for IMDb. And I posted it, and I was just so irritated. And to be fair, it wasn't everyone was saying, this is a brilliant film, you should be seeing it. So, the general critical opinion was that it wasn't very good at all. So it's not like I was a lone voice in the wilderness and felt the need to shout about it. But it was just so bad. And I think the point was, it was so bad after Casino was so damn good that the two things just didn't compute. And so anyway, I wrote this big long screed, and I think I titled it something like an incoherent, chaotic mess, or something like that. Anyway, it attracted a lot of traffic, and for about a week, it was the highest commented thread on Quantum of Solace on IMDb. And pretty much everyone agreed with me on it, which, doesn't mean anything in the sense that it's not like I was making a point that nobody else had made. But it was quite refreshing, actually, because a lot of people were saying, yeah, you're right, and this bit was bad for the similar reason, and all the rest of it. It was, as it were, cathartic. I just think it's a real shame that even if you can pull out some of those elements, whether it's the car chase or any other bits that we might think of, And the points you make about character, which in retrospect, yeah, I can see that. I think the whole thing, there was a lovely quote I picked up. The guy that was the director of the opera, the famous opera in Brienne's with the floating opera house and all of that, which is a huge setting for the kind of climactic part of the film. There was a brilliant quote, and I'm still not sure whether the guy was taking a mickey or not, but he said, "Oh, we were very grateful for Eon for coming, and giving us all this publicity about the film and for filming at Brienne's and all the rest of it." And then right at the end, he says, "Of course, the film was rubbish, but..." And I thought, he didn't actually say the word rubbish, but it was words to that effect. And I was just stunned by that. And I think I even pasted it on IMDb somewhere. But that was just really, really funny. And I just think, it had the worst aspects of all the previous Bond films where they were, as I said, stitched together, as a series of loosely linked set pieces with greater or lesser effect, depending on which film it was. It had all of the worst of that and all of the kind of flip side of modern gritty filmmaking, which, as Simon was rightly saying, I think you make a really good point, which again, I hadn't really thought of, about the problem was the combination of the fluid direction and the really sharp, tight cutting as well. And the two things, you need to have one of them needs to stay quite static for you to get it. And, you can write it off to inexperience or what, but ultimately it was the producers that hired Forster. So you have to wonder what they were aiming at.
Yeah, I think Daniel Craig had a hand in it, actually. I think Daniel Craig liked some of Mark Forster's work and kind of recommended him and got him on board. Because, of course, he has done some fabulous films. I mean, he did Monsters Ball and Finding Neverland and films of that ilk, which are decent films. But
but they're not films that say Bond, though, do they?
Not at all. No, absolutely. They say character, which... I kind of understand where they were going with that, but Quantum of Solace, it had a really hard act to follow with Casino Royale. But I think between the sort of rushed script and the rushed production to get this out, and to sort of they were coming off this massive high because it was a bit of a gamble when Casino Royale came out as to whether people were going to accept Daniel Craig and whether this reboot was going to work, and it did. And they jumped straight in with this, but unfortunately, it has its shortfalls, and enough said, I guess.
Let's move on.
Yeah. So when it was announced that Sam Mendes was going to take over the directing reins, what were your guys' opinion of that?
I didn't really have a view because I'd obviously heard of him and I knew he was a hugely respected director, principally of theatre. But again, I kind of, if you think back to the old days, and it will depend on your, in the nicest possible sense, guys, it will depend on your age. But if you think back to the kind of the pre-Craig, because it's the BC era before Craig, Bond, the production of the Bond films and the way it was announced and the marketing of it was part of the fun. They were released, mechanically every 2 years. About a year before, you would get the announcement of the title. You would then get the casting call about 6 months later. You'd then get the thing about which pop group of the day was going to do the theme tune and all the rest of it. And it was great. And when you're a teenager, you love all that, and it was brilliant. Obviously, things are far more sophisticated now, and coming off the back of 2 films, one of which was very successful and was, universally praised, and one of which wasn't. That had changed. So I don't have a particular memory of any of the specifics around that, other than that there was a lot of discussion about, would the guy make it, because it just wasn't something that he was particularly known with. Yes, he'd done American Beauty, he'd done Road to Perdition as well, and a couple of others. So he had a solid background and probably something solider, if that's the word, than Forster. But and as I recall, there was a fair amount of kind of willy won't he as well. So it wasn't by any means settled. So again, I didn't have a particular view. I was just so desperately hoping that they wouldn't screw it up again. I think that was my main concern. So I was less worried about who would be behind the lens and more a question of what he would do with the lens when he got it and when he pressed the on button.
Yeah, I mean, on that question of Sam Mendes, he's certainly a good director that's got some prior to this some really good work out there. I have my problems with Skyfall, which we'll get into. But I think, Sam Mendes is a really good director of drama. Coming from the sort of theatre background and obviously some of those forementioned films. But I'm not 100% sure that he's a great action director, to be honest. I'm sure we'll get into this. I've got my issues with some of the direction and pacing of Skyfall. Although I will sort of caveat that by saying it's kind of refreshing that we could at least get back to seeing the action and following what was going on. But I think it lacked some tension in places. And if you want me to be specific about that, the scene where they've kind of set Bond up is he's been out of the game for a while, and they go on about, it's quite funny, they've sort of jumped from him being this young, new, fresh Bond to saying that suddenly he's old, and he's going for all this physical stuff. And when he jumps on the lift and he's hanging on the bottom of the lift, that to me would have been a sequence which could have been so tense, it would have been unbelievable. But instead, I felt no tension at all. He just kind of hung on that as if he was a superhero, and didn't sort of feel any jeopardy for him whatsoever. So that was my thing. I felt it lacked some tension, which I don't know whether I should be blaming Sam Mendes completely for that. But Skyfall has lots of other problems, in my opinion, which we'll dig into, I'm sure. But Sam Mendes is certainly a competent director, and it was refreshing after the kind of difficult to follow visuals of Quantum of Solace.
Now, with that scene where he's following the assassin, now for me that was it wasn't an action scene, it was a spying scene. It was actually him just observing and following him, and just to find out more. Because if it had been Casino Royale Bond, he would have chased him up there and run him round, and and probably killed him and not got any further. And this was to show that he was a bit more, it was more thinking, more, well, I'm actually going to see what this guy is up to. And it's not until he's caught out by his reflection in the glass that that it becomes a fight scene.
Yeah.
So that scene wasn't about, it wasn't an action scene. It was a spying scene.
But what I'm saying, Simon, is there should have been tension in it, and I felt that there wasn't. Even a spying scene should, which I agree with you, absolutely, that's what it is. But I just felt that there was no. For me, that part felt very flat, and absolutely, there's some evolution in Craig's in the Bond character, which is good. In fact, it does. Before we get into Skyfall big time, it does actually enter another fan theory that doesn't work. But bless fans, I love the fact they try and make sense of all this. There is a fan theory that between Quantum of Solace and Skyfall, hence why he's suddenly being classed as this is a young man's game, and all of that sort of thing, that apparently the events of all of the other Bond series took place in between, which of course is ludicrous because it doesn't make any sense at all, because obviously this film we have the introduction of Moneypenny and the Mel M character, etc. But I do like those fan theories that are out there. This is trying to explain the Aston Martin, which again we'll come on to I'm sure in due course. But I just thought I'd throw in fan theory number 2.
Well, for me with Skyfall, I never quite bought this whole thing of him being, classed as, old and out the game. It was a bit jarring from the fact that, especially from seeing Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace, he's deemed to be this new buck. He's just been promoted to 007 status. And then suddenly within the space of one film, he's now old and out the game and some sort of dinosaur, which, and it depends on how. Oh, sorry to stop, but who's banging?
Not
That's
me.
the fireworks, like my end, I'm afraid. Can't do much about it.
Fireworks.
Yep.
Oh wow. Okay.
It's kind of in with the theme, so you know.
They're either early or late.
Well, no, it's exactly this point in Skyfall that the fireworks go off, so I think that's quite right.
Oh, okay. It just sounds like somebody's trying to beat down your door.
Our own special effects added. There you go.
All right. So, yeah. So for me, I never kind of bought the fact that he was sort of deemed to be like an older character. You know, was he? You know, was between the bit where he gets shot on top of the train and falls into that sort of nightmarish, title sequence, and then him sort of, enjoying death. Was he out of the game for a long time?
Well, you see, okay, let me come in here because I wasn't aware of that fan theory. I don't do fan theories. I don't do fandom generally. I find it's just
it doesn't make any sense anyway. So forget about
that's
it.
Fine.
Yeah.
But I just accepted the film for what it presented. I don't. You're right. I mean, and actually, the whole idea about Bond being a bit out of it, it's been used several times. But to be fair, my memory of it is that it comes after the train sequence. So actually, part of the reason why he's out of it is because he fakes his own death for an undetermined period of weeks, maybe months, and then comes back and needs, after a lot of boozing and probably a bit of whoring as well, needs to be wound up again so he can be let loose. So for me, I didn't have an issue with any of that. I think, and we may as well get straight into it since we've already kind of got there. For me, this was an absolute triumphant return to form. I have one major caveat about Skyfall, which is why it slightly holds off below Casino Royale for me. But again, first reactions are always important. So I remember seeing it, I know it was only a few years ago, but seeing it in the pictures, it absolutely blew me away. I had a slightly irritating experience. I was at the Odeon Leicester Square, which should be our premiere venue. But my seating meant that quite a few people who can't seem to concentrate for more than half an hour were continually getting up and walking across the screen in front of me. So it wasn't the best venue, but even then I was absolutely gripped by it. And I wasn't even through Casino Royale. It's a much, much darker film than any of the other ones, period. For me, it worked absolutely from the get-go. That pre-credit sequence was terrific. Interesting to hear, Keith, your views on Mendes as an action director. Obviously, anyone would have been an improvement on Forster. And to be slightly fair to Forster, he did improve with World War Z, but that's a whole other podcast. I think for this, I was really thrilled by that opening chase because it got the balance just right. It was really, really kinetic. And for me, going back to the idea of the character, unusually, because like I say, I didn't really pick up on some of the character points from the first couple of films, but for me, he has become reckless again, and perhaps it's the reckless of confidence rather than the reckless of inexperience and youth. He's so desperate to fulfill his job that he pretty much kills himself getting onto that train. The way he drives the bike at the balustrade and just flips onto the train.
Oh God, yeah.
And I love that. It was, as Simon said, it was absolutely coherently shot. No problem at all about that. So you could absolutely follow it. Interestingly, I've seen at least two, I think, chase sequences along exactly the same routes in Istanbul. Taken 3, I think, or Taken 2 was one of them since then. But it was handled very, very well. That shot sequence when he gets taken out on top of the train was terrific. The title sequence is gorgeous. It's it really does repay reviewing in the same way. It's very similar conceptually, it's similar to Casino Royale. It doesn't just tell you about the film, it tells you about the character as well. It's a wonderfully scary, dark, immersive title sequence, and obviously the tune is terrific as well.
I disagree. I don't like the tune at all.
That's right.
I have to say the one of the main problems with the Craig films, apart from Casino Royale, is that the theme tune sucked.
Okay, well we'll do a little sidebar on that maybe at the end.
Yeah, please. Yeah. Actually, let's do that. Credits.
But I think for Skyfall, as you take it through, you go back to that idea again, as Simon was saying about the shadowy villain. That works really well. You have the destruction of MI6, or at least not the destruction of it, but the wounding of it. The flight down to the underworld, and that's another actually reference to what to me is the overall theme of the film, which is if Casino Royale was about love, Skyfall was about death. It's obvious. It's about Bond's death. It's about Severine, the woman who always is the first one that gets killed. About Silver, of course, about M. The whole idea of death is woven throughout the whole film. The lyrics of the title sequence. There was a scene that does appear in the film, but they cut it. After the explosion in MI6, you might remember there's a very short scene where I think M is looking at the coffins, or Bond is looking at the coffins of, and they're supposed to be the MI6 agents that were killed in the building. You don't really get that in the film. What they actually shot was a huge, long, formal funeral sequence at the Royal College at Greenwich. And it was about driving home that point. Well, they cut all that out in the end for timing, which is a shame. But all of that was about the film. And so when you get to the foreign, you get this lovely, wonderful, really kind of Fleming stroke Richard Chopping, who did all those really horrible book jackets of the original films with skulls and creatures and things, original books on them. You get all of that when he goes off to Macau. You get the Komodo dragons, the whole thing. And I think for me, that the only flaw in the film really is the whole story-wise, the whole business about Silver getting himself captured didn't really work, because the whole sequence with the tube chase is just ludicrous. And it's a shame, because the rest of the film is great, but that is an absolutely ludicrous sequence. It makes no sense within the context of the story. It doesn't actually advance the plot in any way that couldn't have been advanced in a more convincing way. It's very, very silly, and it's a shame, because it does kind of pull you out of it.
Well, I have to admit, I didn't have many problems with the tube chase. The thing that knocked me out of it was the fan service to celebrate 50 years of Bond. So when Bond and M are driving up to Scotland, and the whole thing with the Aston Martin being like the one from Goldfinger, that knocked me out. I mean, ejector seat and stuff. And then we get the whole sequence in Skyfall itself, where it's Home Alone.
Oh, I see. I've never seen Home Alone, so I can't comment on that. But for me, it really works, because the whole point is, as he says in the film, he's going back in time. In a lot of ways, he's going back to his family home. He's going back in his past. It's where he and Silver then will meet each other. For me, it was absolutely organic. I have heard people comment on that before, so I'm obviously not going to decry that, because if that's a view, that's a view. But for me, didn't get that at all. I thought that whole final act worked really, really well. It was darker than all the rest. Of course, it ends in the worst way possible. And I think, again, just to finish it, the way it flips around in the end, the way it resets the clock, and as one of you said at the beginning, we've got a new M, a new Moneypenny. The whole thing begins again. It's beautifully done, really, really well done. Well acted by Naomi Harris, particularly. Definitely got to do a shout out for Mr. Fiennes as the new M. I thought he was terrific. And I can't be the only one to think that at one point, when anything was going a bit pear-shaped, there's a great shot of him with his arm bandaged, and he comes up behind Ben Whishaw, and you really think he's going to be the bad guy. You think he's going to pull a gun and shoot him or something. And I think that's a credit to the whole thing, the script, the direction, and Ralph Fiennes as an actor. So, no, I loved it. Tube sequence aside, I think it's terrific.
Well, the problem I had with the car was because in Casino Royale, he had won a car like that. So when he, I'll just get my car out of the garage, I thought that was going to be the Casino Royale car. But then, of course, it turned out to be more like the car from Goldfinger. And for me, it was just like, oh, God, really?
Well, they're both DB5s, so does it? I'm not sure it matters.
Well, yeah, but the one in Casino Royale didn't have ejector seats and machine guns,
and it was a different side drive. It was a different, it was a left-hand drive or whatever. So yeah,
well,
it was.
There's a fair point about the special equipment, but I suppose you could say that in this continuity, there's no reason why, having won it, he didn't get Q Branch to add all the extras.
I know, but they had gone they had moved away from that a lot. They had moved away from the gadgets. I mean, the gadgets that he does use, you kind of, they seem to be more practical.
Yeah, they're more real world.
And something that a field agent would have. Because that was one of the things with the other Bond films, was that, I'm going to go down to Q, and he's going to give me all the devices I'm going to need to get out of all the action and traps and everything that I'm going to be in.
Yeah, no,
it's like somebody get the copy of the script to Q and say, so can you come up with magnetic watch, threads that can blow up, all the stuff that he's going to need to escape the
I think
traps.
that's true, but I don't think they overdid it, because I don't even think they used the ejector seat. But if they do, I don't remember it.
No, they joked about it. Oh well, they used the ejector seat in Spectre though, didn't they?
Oh, that's way too young.
Yeah, I was going to say.
In terms of Skyfall, I think it worked really well. It was a sufficient nod to tie up continuity, but it didn't overwhelm the story. The car gets blown to bits in the end anyway, so it doesn't really matter either way. Yeah, no, for me, I loved it. I think it was great. And I think, again, with the spoiler warning duly announced, killing off M, never saw that one coming at all. I don't know to this day, and it doesn't matter now, obviously, whether there was any leakage, or because I avoid all spoilers and all previews beforehand, apart from the trailer. So I really didn't see that coming at all, and that really, really shocked me. So, all credit for them for doing it.
No, there wasn't any spoilers about that. That was certainly not a plot point they'd gotten out.
Right, Skyfall then. Sorry, I've got a few things to say about this. First of all, I'll say that there is a hell of a lot of good in this film. It is still a strong film, even though I've got my issues with it. But there's some really good stuff and some really strong points to this, which I'll come to. I'm going to kind of get some of my gripes out of the way first. Going right back to the beginning. Okay, one of the things I did like about Quantum of Solace at the end was they decided to do the gun barrel logo at the end. And I thought to myself, even though Quantum of Solace had its problems, I thought to myself, you know what? That kind of makes sense, because he's been on this arc from the beginning of Casino Royale, which you've already said, Chris. They did amazingly with the sort of way they incorporated a sort of gun barrel logo, but it wasn't exactly that. And then they waited right the way through. We didn't get it at the beginning of Quantum of Solace, but we kind of ended that with it. And I thought, okay, fine. And James Bond will return. And obviously this is supposed to be some years on. Now, the fact, straight away, I was angry right from the moment that the MGM logo had gone, because I wanted to see, as a Bond fan, the opening gun barrel logo with the Bond music, and we didn't get that. And I thought, what the hell? We should have this. So that angered me, that they left it to the end in this film. It should have been at the beginning, in my opinion. I do agree with you, though, that I thought the actual credit sequence and theme song, which I know we're going to come on to as a separate thing later, was great. In terms of the actual story, well, one of the things I have a problem with, and again, my good friend and composer Neil Myers, I know, is a big fan of Thomas Newman, and who has done some excellent work, don't get me wrong. One of the few creative control things that a director of a Bond film does get, that isn't so producer-led, is they do get to pick their composer. And obviously Sam Mendes always works with Thomas Newman, who's done some fantastic tracks with him. I have to say, though, as a Bond score, I had problems with Skyfall. I really liked David Arnold's work. To me, David Arnold kind of did what John Barry had done through the golden years of Bond, and had sort of modernized it. I felt that in this there wasn't enough of the Bond theme for my liking, and I kind of got it. The fact that they didn't give it all away right from the beginning of Casino Royale, but by now I thought we were at a point where not only could we have gun barrel logos, but we could also have Bond themes, and it wasn't played enough in this, in my opinion. The other thing, yes, I love the sort of new introduction of a younger Q. Again, we've had a woman M, and it's time now to have, rather than Q being an older, more experienced guy that he sort of has a fatherly figure and looks up to, we've got a young Brave New World, as he puts it, in Ben Whishaw. I kind of like that. The gun, which wasn't really a new gadget because he had a signature gun in License to Kill, but that ended up just becoming that sort of plotty bit with the the dragons, which again I kind of didn't like that. That to me was very sort of CGI and pulled me out, and I had a problem with that bit.
Yeah, that was just, there was a lot of use of CGI creatures in it. The scorpion on his hand at the beginning was really badly done CGI.
Yeah,
it's funny because I never noticed that, and I certainly never noticed the Komodo dragons. It's not the first time I've heard that, but as with everything, you can only go by what you experience, and perhaps it was down to the way I was sitting and what I was looking at, but I never noticed that at all. So, and I'm glad I didn't, because it wasn't a problem.
No, I mean, these are things that obviously kind of ruined it for me. I'm nearly at the end of my gripes, and then I'll obviously say some good things. Moving forward, I'm absolutely 100% in the same camp as Simon on this whole Aston Martin DB5 malarkey. Basically,
I thought I was picky. Wow.
No, I have a real issue with this. And I understand why they did it. I get it that it was the 50th anniversary of Bond and all this sort of thing. I can kind of see why they did it, and I know the audience loved it and it got a cheer and all that sort of shit. And by the way, the music that they use when they reveal that is actually one of David Arnold's cues. Interestingly, best cue in the film. Anyway. But yeah, the Aston Martin I had a problem with, because again, as Simon had said, they'd gone through this thing of rebooting Bond with Casino Royale, and therefore, going back to the origin story and wiping the slate clean. Okay. And this just felt like, a total fan service, going back to, referencing Goldfinger. It obviously makes no sense whatsoever within the continuity of the reboot and the Daniel Craig films. It was done very subtly by having him win a DB5 in Casino Royale, but it was a completely different car. It was a different side drive. It was just that it was a silver DB5. And all of the references to having an ejector seat and all that really pissed me off. And the fact that they get to use the machine guns in the next gripe I've got, which again I agree with Simon on. I hated the whole M. Guyver bloody A-Team Home Alone finale thing. I just thought that was really poor. And yeah, had real issue with that part or that plot point. On the plus side, though, I agree with you, Chris, that I didn't see the M death coming, and I thought that they handled that beautifully, and that was well acted and a nice sort of arc for her character. I also really enjoyed the introduction finally of Moneypenny, and I love Naomi Harris anyway, but I think she's absolutely fabulous in the role, and I'm glad that they've gone with a different ethnicity and whatever for that character. I think that's great. And yeah, Ray Fiennes, I can't say enough good things as taking over from M. It's quite interesting that Rafe was actually one of the contenders for Bond between the Dalton and Brosnan era. He was kind of on the list and had been in chats with Eon Productions. So I think it's quite nice that even though he didn't end up actually being a James Bond, he has become now part of the franchise, and I think his addition as M is great. I love the whole ending of it, where we're back in the office and you see the famous padded door that Bonds, the classic Bonds were famous for, and the going through Moneypenny's office and all of that sort of stuff. So I
fascinating fan fact. One of those doors was the one they used from the set from The Spy Who Loved Me.
Hey, brilliant. I love that. I love those facts. So yeah, there was a lot of good things in this. My gripes are somewhat nitpicky. I mean, the thing about the Aston Martin and the reboot, I kind of liken it a little bit to, and this is a whole nother podcast, so I'll say it briefly, but kind of what they did with Star Trek Into Darkness after doing an absolutely fantastic reboot with 2009 Star Trek, where they could go off in any direction they wanted. And then when they came to Into Darkness, they had to do the whole Wrath of Khan thing. And I had sorry, spoilers, guys, but I had a big issue with that also. And it just seems a shame when these franchises do a really good job of reinventing themselves, that suddenly they'll do some winky fan service thing like that, and I didn't like that. But overall, it's not a bad movie. I will say that, and you know.
Well, as we're going into Spectre, I will say that the reveal of Blofeld, when he says, "Well, I don't go by this other name. I'm known as Blofeld," and to the character, it's kind of like, "Yeah, so what?" But to the audience, it's like, "Ooh, Blofeld," and I think that's a problem with cinema at the moment, is that they do things in films that have meaning for the audience, but for the character they're doing it to, there's like, what? So, like in Star Trek Into Darkness, when it's revealed who Cumberbatch is Khan, he goes, "I am Khan." So the character is like, "Yeah, I'm Kirk. Hi, nice to meet you." Doesn't mean anything, but to the audience, "Oh my God, it's Khan!" So it's this weird thing where, for an audience member, it means a lot, but to the characters in the film, it's like, "Oh, okay, good for you. You're calm."
But you see, I think that's an interesting point. I think that's a good way to segue into Spectre, because Keith, I think you were saying about, fan service element in terms of the DB5. If you remember, and I'm sure you wouldn't want to, but if you remember Die Another Day, which was the 40th? It was either the 40th or the 20th film. I can't remember. There was a point to it.
It was the 40th anniversary. It was the 40th anniversary film, and they had a horrible load of references because of that.
They did,
yeah.
And exactly that. Some of which actually were quite subtle. An awful lot of them, as with the rest of the film, actually weren't. And for me, as I say, we might as well get into it, but that was one of the things that ruined Spectre. And I think it's very strange. And I think, I'll introduce it by saying that for me, what I found was very curious when you look at it is that out of the 4 films, you start incredibly strongly, we're all agreed. You then have a massive failure, because it was. You then pick yourself up again broadly with Skyfall. And then amazingly, and even more amazingly, seeing it's the same director, it falls over completely again in the last film. And even more weirdly, when you start to analyse it, it has exactly the same structure in terms of flaws and good bits, I think. So in the same way that for me, Quantum had a pretty strong opening, and then it kind of faded after that, Spectre's the same. I think that amazing opening, which looked at the time to be a single shot, although it turns out it wasn't, but still very good, with the Day of the Dead parade, absolutely brilliant. And the helicopter stunt as well, so you kind of get 2 pre-credit sequences in one, which is lovely. Quite like the theme tune. Spoiler. I quite liked it. And not interestingly, not a very good at all, actually, title sequence under it, I didn't think. Didn't really tell us much other than the heavily trailed bit about Spectre, but hey, that's what the film's called, so that's not really a surprise. And then it kind of went downhill. And again, obviously it was the most recent one, but I remember my reactions very clearly. The first thing, and I haven't seen it, I should say, I haven't seen it again since it was out, whatever it was, last year. Not sure I necessarily want to be honest. I think you have this bizarre, aimless, and appropriate since we're talking about cars, you have this bizarre, aimless car chase, which is without doubt the worst car chase I've ever seen. Because it isn't a chase. A chase has a beginning and an end. And the point is the person doing the chasing is pursuing the pursuee for a reason. Well, apart from using the ejector seat, which they don't even show you, probably because they were embarrassed, it's just them pootling around a deserted Rome with no sense of urgency. A lot of weird, in-jokey stuff about, 0010 or 009's car and all these gadgets. And then this pathetic ending. And I just thought, are you taking a mickey or is this serious? And unfortunately, the rest of the film went on like that. I can't even remember most of it, which is probably a good thing. I think you talked earlier, both of you, about Bond as a character as portrayed by Craig and how he develops and then potentially sort of slips back a bit. Having introduced Ralph Fiennes so well, he then becomes this sort of strange, slightly camp figure in this film, which didn't really make a lot of sense. You have Lea Seydoux coming in, trying hard, but in a woefully underwritten part. And then for me, what really, really ruined it, if I was out of loyalty, was hanging on up to this point. I think the two things that really screwed it for me was the man, I can't even remember his name, sadly, he plays the villain, well-known actor.
Christoph Waltz.
Thank you very much. I thought after 10 years of getting away from Middle European Nehru-jacketed villains, we have, a Middle European Nehru-jacketed villain. And he doesn't have an underground lair, but he does have a hollowed-out volcano. Really? Is that what we're down to now? To me, you can term it fan-pleasing, or, affectionate nod or homage, or whatever one of those justifying phrases you want to use. To me, it just sucked. It was really, really poor. And I think I'm by no means an advocate for the sort of feminist branch of filmmaking. I don't really have a view one way or the other. But even I found it desperate that Léa Seydoux gets tied up and, caught in a lift shaft at the end. Again, really? Is that what we've come down to in 2015? I really hated it, actually. I thought it was a real disaster. I actually think it was worse than Quantum of Solace, albeit not by much. And it just felt like shoving, and there were, nods to the past, like the rooftop restaurant in the Alps, which is an obvious nod to Majesty's Secret Service. But I don't want all that. I don't want nods. You've given up on that years ago. You don't need to go back there again. And if it wasn't a hoped for end to the Craig era, I really think it had to be an end to it, because if that was the best they could do, it wasn't going to go anywhere.
Well, I thought it was an end to the Craig, but not for those reasons. I thought it tied it up quite nicely, because I have to say, I disagree with you a hell of a lot.
That's all right.
But the characters in this film, all the actors seem to be at ease with their characters. They seem to know them quite well, including Daniel Craig. You have a character now who's far more seasoned, who he, instead of going around running after people and shooting them, he has a lot more control. And I thought the fan service in it, even though there was a bit, wasn't as bad as Skyfall. It wasn't as
it was worse. It was way worse
as Skyfall. No, it was not. No, not in any way. I mean, it wasn't sort of a joke made out of it. Oh, Blofeld. Oh. No.
So the bit...
I watched it again last night. Now, I mean, I agree with you about the car chase through Rome. It wasn't that exciting, but the fight in the train, I really loved the fight in the train. I thought Batista was a very good sort of Bond, not villain, but kind of like secondary. And that's that fight where they're using everything, to hit each other. I mean, that was the stuff that me and my friends were talking about when we were younger, when after seeing the Pierce Brosnan films and stuff like that, where wouldn't it be great to see a villain who kills people with stuff that's around him? It's not some sort of like with Jaws, he bites them with his metal teeth, or with Oddjob where he uses a bowler hat to behead people and stuff like that.
No, I accept that, but I think the very fact, and you're right, it was a good sequence, but it was still another fight on a train. Well, that's quite a familiar Bond trope. Anything on the ice, anything with skis, anything on the water, it's fine. I mean, it's really interesting hearing a different view, and most people liked Spectre, so I appreciate that I'm probably in the minority. But again, I just thought it was. I mean, like I say, underground volcano, Middle European.
Well, it wasn't a volcano.
It was a hollow.
I mean, it was a meteor crater.
That's it.
I mean, they actually had the meteor there. I mean, I kind of liked its themes about the whole, surveillance society we live in. I mean, which was something that was kind of, they're following on from Skyfall, because with the villain in that, he was a character who was able to sort of hack into stuff and use the internet to his benefits. I mean, the way that he, the island they find him on, it was evacuated because through using his knowledge of the internet and stuff, he was able to hack in and make it look like there was a meltdown in the plant there, making everybody rush out. You know, that kind of sort of cyber terrorism, which is kind of like, you know, was a topic that they did in Black Hat, which they didn't do that successfully. And but in a Bond film, kind of works. That whole it seems to be that sort of touch of fantasy where you think, God, you know, nobody could ever do that, really. Who knows? But it is that whole sort of idea of, you know, you're being, all of us are being surveillance all the time. We're on video cameras wherever we go. And how do people use that information? I mean, we're living in an era where you know, websites get hacked and your information is then sold on to people, and then, you know, people are making money off you. And so this film kind of taps into that, the whole idea of, you know, of surveillance, of, you know, is another form of control. You know, they manipulate countries to sign on to this, you know, this act by doing acts of terrorism, you know, because they had this vote, don't they, where South Africa is the only one who votes for no.
Mm-hmm.
And so the next thing you know, there's a terrorist atrocity that happens there. A bomb goes off, and so then they're given a reason why they should vote yes. And we see this stuff in the news. I mean, I'm not saying that there's a Spectre out there and they're trying to get all our information, but we are living in an age where, you know, we're all on the internet. We're all on the internet. We give our details away to all these kind of websites. I mean, even if we log on to Wi-Fi now in shops, we give them our information, and you do not know what those companies are doing with our information. Most of those companies are selling the information on to advertisers. One of the main reasons why we get spam is because somebody has sold our email address to somebody. And if they haven't sold it, then somebody's gotten that information from somewhere and they've passed it on to these people. And that's, you know, it's an inconvenience, but then you wonder what else can be done with your information. I don't think it's like the net where somebody could be, you know, taken out of existence like Sandra Bullock, but it does make you think. And to have something like that in a Bond film is kind of refreshing, because most of the time in Bond films, the villain, you know, is a global domination. I mean, it did become a bit of a joke with the Austin Powers films, you know, Dr. Evil, $1 million. And so these Bond films have sort of kind of brought it back to the sort of times we're living in.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm glad you both sort of went first, really, because I take both of your points and I agree with some and disagree with others. I have to say, for me, just looking at it overall, and I can, as you well know, I can certainly nitpick stuff. But for me, Spectre was actually very enjoyable. And I actually found it more enjoyable, and it worked for me better than Skyfall, which I know I'm usually in a minority on with that statement. But I'll hopefully sort of back it up a little bit here as to why. First of all, right from the get-go, the thing that made me happy and I was smiling within seconds of this starting was I got my gun barrel logo with the James Bond theme at the beginning of the film, where it bloody should be. Yeah. So they got that, you know, they got that right this time, in my opinion. That was great to see. So I thought that started off well. One of the things, just a thing about Eon Productions here, and I think they're kind of damned if they do, damned if they don't. What I mean by that is, regardless of how great Casino Royale was, and the three of us have certainly waxed lyrical about this film, but I have lots of, you know, not necessarily people in the industry, but I have lots of mates that are Bond fans and are film fans. And it's interesting because Casino Royale brought up a massive amount of debate amongst my sort of Bond fan friends. And it was interesting because with Casino Royale, they kind of, a lot of people had the problems that some of the tropes and the formula was missing. So in other words, they'd say it was annoying that he didn't have Bond luck and he wasn't womanizing and there wasn't one-liners and there was no gadgets and there was no Q branch and there wasn't a villain's lair and there weren't exotic locations and all of those sort of things that people say, well, that's what makes a Bond film, right? In this film, you finally got, I mean, it literally ticks every box I've just mentioned there. Yeah. And you know, you have all of that. It is more back to a sort of classic Bond formula and those tropes. But now, of course, and I understand this, people are saying, oh yeah, but this is a bit silly and this is a bit far-fetched and all of that sort of thing. So they are kind of damned if they do, damned if they don't. I thought that they got the balance of this quite good in this film. And I do totally agree with Simon where even though I take your point, Chris, that there are references and tropes and you know, harkens back to the classic films in this, I do still feel that they are done in a more subtle and realistic way than the Aston Martin was in Skyfall. For me personally, I didn't have a problem. They kind of made me smile that those references were there. But I didn't think that they were too heavy-handed.
Can I just interrupt you for a sec? I think the reason why it works better in Spectre than Skyfall is because it starts off with those references in the film and it's peppered throughout. While Skyfall, you don't have anything, and then suddenly at the end,
boom,
the third act, boom, there it is, and you're like, what? So I mean, straight away when you start off with the skeleton face, it, you know, live and let die.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's full of those references.
It is absolutely full of them, and I kind of take Chris's point where it's gone from something that obviously they'd set up this new reboot and had it all sort of very realistic and very serious to something that's now somewhat more fantastical with this. But I do feel that, again, if we're looking at Daniel Craig's arc, which is kind of the theme of this particular podcast, I feel that throughout the films, he has kind of got to this point now where he has got over some of his issues, you know, from losing Vesper and, you know, having his heart broken and things of that nature. And he's had more missions and he's become more confident as a character. So I think that if you like, in terms of a beginning, middle and end, we have kind of now gone back to the Bond you know, of the past, and I think it sort of works. And I also think the score to this film was better because, as I said, I kind of slagged off Thomas Newman for Skyfall, but I thought in this instance it worked better. We'll come on to the theme song and credit sequences when we do our thing at the end on that, so I won't go there yet. The other thing I thought was there was some quite good continuity. They obviously did try and tie up a lot of plot points and loose ends from the other films. They kind of retconned the whole Quantum thing, whereas Quantum was part of the Spectre organization. Now, I won't go into it on this podcast because we don't have time, but I did actually do a lecture on Spectre at the City Lit, which was about the whole sort of history of Spectre and why they weren't able to use the name and a lot of the backstory until this point. But rather than go into that in this podcast, what I might do at some point is there is an audio recording of it, although it's not particularly great. And so I've got that plus some of the slides that I use. So maybe at some point I can get that edited and we can add it as a link, you know, on the site maybe. But
or if you've got the audio, why not have as a bonus episode for the podcast?
Now, I mean, the audio isn't great quality though because it was recorded in a lecture theatre. But I don't know, it might work. Maybe that's something we'll look into. But moving on into Spectre, as I said, I think overall, it was very enjoyable, and it worked for a lot of those reasons. I mean, it was a bit silly in places. I, like you, Simon, I thought the train fight was absolutely superb, and obviously referenced both From Russia with Love and Spy Who Loved Me all in one. If I had to have a nitpick about that, though, it just made me laugh that after all of that fight, they didn't stop the train. They kept going and getting dropped off, which obviously is totally unrealistic, but all part of it. The other thing, again, this is being a bit nitpicky, but if I had to, and I've heard some people complain about this, the whole sort of, okay, not actual brother, but the whole sort of Blofeld and Bond, sort of growing up together, which was sort of referenced briefly in Skyfall and picked up on in this. People have made sort of allusions to Dr. Evil and said that that's a little bit silly. But I'm kind of don't have a massive problem with it. It's okay,
Well, I think why people think it's silly is because it plays into the whole fact that this one character was behind the scenes throughout all 4 films.
Yeah.
And I think it's whether or not you buy that or not. That that he was so pissed off with Bond. I mean, the whole thing of him being a cookie. Mm-hmm. That he would go to such extremes to make Bond's life hell.
Yeah.
But the things that happen in Casino Royale, no way of knowing that it would have been Bond chasing Le Chiffre,
Yeah, I know it's a massive buy. Yeah. It is a massive buy.
Yeah.
But on the most part, I enjoy it, and there's lots to say about these films. I know we've already said a lot, but there's still a lot more, and probably things I've missed here, and listeners will be screaming, "Oh, why didn't you mention that?" But overall, that's where it's at, and I was quite satisfied with this film, and I've enjoyed all of the Daniel Craig films, but this one for me was probably the second one in enjoyment after Casino Royale, which it doesn't quite top in my opinion.
Yeah, Casino Royale is a hard act to follow.
Indeed it is.
So yeah, as we sort of reaching the end of this, just briefly talking about the credit sequence. So as we alluded to, the credit sequences in this, they quite heavily involve Daniel Craig in them, which is kind of unusual for Bond films, because usually you might see Bond at the beginning and then it's usually like a model or something for the rest of it, or a silhouette, and to see Daniel Craig actually in him in the credit sequence is something quite novel. But...
Well, I mean, Maurice Binder did it with Moonraker a little bit, where Roger Moore and Jaws had sort of jumped out of the airplane and it went slightly into the beginning credits. And obviously Daniel Kleinman, who took over for the Pierce Brosnan films, Die Another Day, even though we all agree I think is not a great film, but some of the credit sequence to that actually ties into the film as well. So it has been done before that, maybe even more so with this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think Simon makes a good point, which I hadn't really thought of before. My view is that Casino Royale was the first film since, actually, and we keep coming back to Die Another Day, which is really worrying. It was the first film that actually continued part of the story, because it confirms there's text and there's shots that show the confirmation of his 00 status. So that is actually part of the plot, albeit a small part. And then that was picked up again with Skyfall, of course. I say, with the exception of Spectre, which I thought was somewhat forgettable because I clearly have forgotten it. I think they were all very, very good and very creditable, and I've actually, kind of alluded to those before. I didn't mention that, again, one of the very few good bits about Quantum was the title sequence. I know, again, I'm probably alone in that, but I really liked it. I always liked the tune, and I think the actual credits are fantastic. This kind of slightly weird idea of, it's actually quite hard to describe, but how the camera angles change and one thing sort of becomes another. I really enjoyed that. I thought it was good. It was kind of retro, but but quite of the moment simultaneously.
Yeah, I mean the theme tunes themselves, I think, in the grand scheme of Bond films, are not great. The first one for Casino Royale is probably the best out of the Daniel Craig ones, but they're I mean, I would listen to a lot of the other theme tunes from the other Bond films, but these ones not really. And I think the one for Spectre is the worst. I actually when that film first time I watched it, I actually turned off the sound when that theme tune came on. I thought it was terrible and it was whiny.
Well, I wouldn't disagree with you actually with pretty much everything you've said. Although, funnily enough, I'd never heard of Sam Smith because I'm not into modern music particularly. But I heard the tune in a pub in Liverpool weeks before the film came out, and I thought, I quite like that. I wonder what it is. And I asked someone, and they said, "Oh, it's the new Bond film." I thought, "Oh, right, okay." So I didn't think it was too bad, but yeah, I as I say, I'm pretty much with you in terms of the ratings of it.
I have to say, I found when I first heard Adele's Skyfall, I liked that straight away. When I first heard Sam Smith's Writings on the Wall for Spectre, I didn't like it initially, but I found it a real grower, and I think it definitely worked really well in the film. With the theme in there. So yeah, I like that one, and of course, I liked Chris Cornell's song for Casino Royale. Excellent, and the way they did the pre-credits or the actual credit sequence for that was really good. The only one I had, they used a different company for Quantum of Solace. It wasn't the usual Daniel Kleinman credits, so they did try something different with that. But I wasn't a big fan of the Jack White, Alicia Keys song. I know they did something different with it being more of a duet thing. But I think probably next to Madonna's one, it's probably the worst one for me.
Oh God! Actually, yeah, the Madonna one has to be the worst one ever.
It's definitely up there or down there, depending on your point of view.
I have to say the other one that springs to mind that I've never is one track I've never liked was the theme tune to The Man with the Golden Gun.
Oh yeah, Lulu's one. Yeah, that's kind of
awful
with these kind of innuendo-y lyrics. Yes,
I didn't mind that. It was just an awful tune.
Yeah,
it's probably not a coincidence that some of the best American films happened in the late 60s and early 70s, and at the same time they were pretty much rock bottom for a lot of the British films, and particularly the Bond films. I don't think that's a coincidence.
No, not at all. Okay, to sort of wrap up then, one thing I will say is, I know we've kind of said, and we've kind of, I think, come to the conclusion with what we've talked about with Daniel Craig, that he does indeed have an arc. And you know, I know you've both said that you feel, you know, Spectre is the end of that arc to an extent. However, I just want to pose this thought, which could be awful, but but it's a thought nonetheless. First of all, I'd love to see Daniel Craig do another one, regardless of what may have appeared in the news at the moment. You know, I've seen many of an interview where he said that he may do more as well. But I sort of find now we've got Blofeld, and now we've got Bond. He's kind of left Secret Service and he's happy. It almost loans itself now to in the vein of end of On Her Majesty's Secret Service and beginning of Diamonds Are Forever. It could almost loan itself to you know, a Blofeld revenge film. You know, where Madeline Swan, you know, does end up getting killed or something at the hand of Blofeld, and this is what brings Bond back into the Secret Service and get revenge. I mean, I know we've covered this before in films, but I just put that out there as a thought. Is it necessarily the end, or could he carry on and do more?
I would like to think it was the end, because that storyline is as soon as you were saying it, I was just like, oh, really? I mean, give the guy a break.
Yeah, I mean, he's happy now, which is nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
the problem is less with Craig and almost completely on the side of the production. I take the valiant defences that are mounted in favour of Spectre, but for me it was a disaster, and it showed that for whatever reason, either the franchise is tired or it needs one of its periodic renewals. And it may be that the sheer effort of producing 4 films in that new vein that we talked about, that Casino Royale ushered in, has a kind of natural end to it, in the same way that most pop groups don't last more than about 7 years, with a few honourable exceptions. Maybe there's a similar issue around that kind of ongoing franchise. And at the moment, all those other franchisable films seem to get redone every 2 or 3 years. Frankly, I tuned out years ago, but there must be something in that, I think. So I think it's less to do with Craig in terms of him as an actor and as portrayal of the character, and everything to do with what the franchise can do with that actor and with that character, and it's whether the two feel themselves matched still. And as I say, my view pretty firmly all this year, for various reasons, has been they're not.
All right. Well, final thing then. Who do you think should replace him?
I was hoping you wouldn't ask that. I don't have a view, because you'd need to sit down with Spotlight and crank through all of the male actors aged between about 30 and 40. I don't think it should be Idris Elba. He's just not the right kind of actor for that role. I don't think it should be Tom Hiddleston either, for the same reason. Make of that what you will. But I don't know. I doubt anyone guessed when they replaced the character in every one of its 6 or 7 different iterations. A bit like Doctor Who, actually. I don't think anyone really guessed any of those. So I don't.
There's the answer. Bond is a Time Lord. That's why. It all makes sense. That's what it is. There you go. Theory number 3.
Would his TARDIS have an ejector seat though? That's the question.
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably. Yeah, I mean, Idris Elba, I think, is out of the running because he's now filming the Dark Tower series. And if you read the books, you know it's a very, very long series. So God knows how many films are going to be made of that. And I don't know. It'd be nice to see an unknown do it. Maybe a Keith Eyles?
Yeah, I'll do it. I'm available. If Eon Productions are listening, Debbie Williams or whatever, hey, I'll come in and read. Give it to me, baby. No. I mean, I think, for me, I think actually Michael Fassbender would be great. And the reason I say that is I don't know whether you've seen X-Men First Class, but at the beginning of that's set in 1964, I believe, 62 or 64, but it's right around the sort of, Dr. No stroke Goldfinger era. And if you see him in that, in the sort of 60s skinny 3-piece suit, he really does, I think, look the part. And I also believe he has the acting chops to pull it off as well. So I actually think Michael Fassbender would make a great Bond.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
But who knows? He's not the only contender for sure. But if they're really desperate and really scraping the bottom, I have lost a lot of weight in the last 6 months. So, I'm absolutely up for it 100%. It would be a dream come true. Literally. There you go.
Oh, brilliant. I think that brings us the end to our Bond special. Just leaves me to thank Chris Rogers for joining us. Thank you, Chris.
You're very welcome.
Thanks for bearing with us, Chris. I know it's been a tough fight, a tough journey, but thank you, and loved your opinions on all this stuff.
It's all right. These missions always go on longer than you expect.
They do.
So it just leaves us to end in our customary manner. So, Chris, where can people find your work?
They can find me online at www.chrismrogers.net.
And Keith, where can we find your work?
Yeah, go to YouTube and put in British Eyles, Eyles, as in my last name, and there are films that I've made on there. And if you want to see any other stuff that I've been up to, if you go on IMDb and put in my name, Keith Eyles, you'll find credits there.
And you'll also find Keith listed amongst Bond characters. He's actually in a list of Bond characters because he appears in a film with 007 in his character's name.
God, close but no cigar, or no Rolex, or whatever.
Omega, yeah.
No martini, yeah.
So you can find my work at independentrunnings.com. You can listen to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, and all other places where you get your podcasts from. Also, follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Just search for Movie Heaven, Movie Hell, and leave us a review and a rating on iTunes and Stitcher. So thank you very much for listening to this special, and join us for the next episode of Movie Heaven, Movie Hell.